Now that week 3 is in the books, let's take a look at 4 players that I'm looking to trade for in my fantasy league, starting first with Lions running back David Montgomery. And to kick this off, I want to play a quick game of Monty versus other running backs to start this season. So first question, who has more rushing yards this year? David Montgomery, Bijan Robinson, or James Cook? Second question, who has more rushing touchdowns this year? David Montgomery, J.K. Dobbins, or Breece Hall? And third question, who has more total touches? David Montgomery, Jonathan Taylor, or Derrick Henry? Now, as you probably guessed, David Montgomery was the correct answer to every one of those questions, and I think most people will be surprised to see that David Montgomery is currently a top 10 fantasy running back. He has been that good every week, yet no one really seems to recognize just how good he's been, and myself included. I have him in one league where I haven't even started him yet this year because I have Breece Hall and Kyren Williams, so Monty's 18 fantasy points per game have just been chilling on my bench because I drafted him in like the 8th round, and that might be the same situation that the team with Montgomery in your league is in. He or she may not even recognize that they have a top 10 running back on their team or even on their bench, so it might not be super difficult to trade for him right now. This is a player who last year was a top 15 running back in fantasy points per game, is on one of the best offenses in the entire NFL, and one of the most run-heavy offenses that can support both him and Jahmyr Gibbs simultaneously. He has one of the highest equities among all running backs for rushing touchdowns, as he's tied for 6th in the league in carries inside the 10 and tied for 9th in carries inside the 5. And we can't forget the absolute massive upside that David Montgomery has if Jahmyr Gibbs were to miss any games and he gets the entire Lions backfield to himself, as we saw with 2 massive games last year without Jahmyr Gibbs. So if you find yourself needing a running back right now, which I'm sure like 95% of you watching could use a running back with how this season's gone, Monty might be a relatively cheaper option for high-end RB2 or even RB1 fantasy production for the remainder of the year. Upgrade from Jordan Mason, Chuba Hubbard, or if someone's really in on Braylon Allen, then take advantage of that. Or please upgrade from Rachaad White before the wheels completely fall off of him, or move a wide receiver like Zay Flowers, Jalen Waddle, or Rashid Shaheed if you have the extra wide receiver depth, and go get David Montgomery. Now, as I said, I'm sure a bunch of you watching need some extra running back depth or even starters right now, and maybe don't have enough to go up and get David Montgomery or anyone else of a higher caliber. So let me point your attention to Bengals running back Zach Moss. All summer, we were trying to figure out what the split between Moss and Chase Brown would be, and through 3 weeks, it has been very clear that it is Zach Moss's backfield. He's had 11 or more touches every week, including 17 touches on Monday night this week, compared to Chase Brown, who hasn't been over 9 touches in any game this year. Moss gets solid receiving work with 4+ targets in 2 out of 3 games played so far. He gets the red zone work as he's top 5 in red zone and 10 zone carries in the entire league right now. And he's a top 20 fantasy running back, averaging 13.5 PPR points per game, which is better than Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, Rachaad White, Ramondre Stevenson, and Tony Pollard. But Zach Moss just doesn't have the same name recognition as those other guys. We know that the main RB1 for the Bengals is in a great situation for fantasy football, and that is exactly what Zach Moss is right now. So again, I would love to buy Moss for those depth receiver players like Rashid Shaheed, JSN, Xavier Worthy, or Terry McLaurin, or side grade from temporary running backs like Jerome Ford or Chuba Hubbard. Or it might be possible to trade away Isaiah Pacheco for Zach Moss if the manager with Moss views Pacheco as a season-long upgrade for when he returns, but you get a starter now that's going to help score you points with Pacheco out. But before we move on, I wanted to let y'all know to head over to 4for4.com and sign up for a subscription today to gain access to the industry's best weekly rankings from award-winning ranker for accuracy John Paulson, plus you get access to our start-sit tool, trade calculator, articles, and there are additional packages for DFS and betting content too. Make sure to use the code YouTube at checkout to receive 25% off your annual subscription today. All right, moving away from the running back position to the tight end position, because I know that everyone out there is struggling right now. The best tight end that I'm looking to buy in every league right now is Dalton Kincaid, who, yes, is coming off his best week of the season, but on a season level, he is still just the tight end 11, averaging 7.5 PPR points per game. The reason I love buying Kincaid right now is because of the usage over the past 2 weeks that just hasn't necessarily translated into production just yet. 9 targets over the last 2 weeks, 74 yards, and he did find the end zone last night in effectively just 4 quarters of actually meaningful football. And that's the kicker here. The Bills have shredded their opponents 2 weeks in a row now, basically ending the game by halftime each week. So the Bills really haven't had to throw much, and that's limiting the production for Dalton Kincaid. 2/3 of Kincaid's targets the past 2 weeks have been in the first half, and he hasn't even had a single target in the fourth quarter. So when the game matters, Kincaid is very much involved. The game just hasn't mattered all that much in 2 weeks in a row. But the Bills do get to play the Baltimore Ravens this week. They get the Texans next week, Jets and Seahawks in October, then the Chiefs, Niners, Rams, and Lions from week 12 on. Some of the most important weeks in the season for fantasy football. So as the Bills get into more competitive games and possible shootout games against better opponents, Kincaid should be very involved for the entirety of games, not just the first half, and the production should also follow. I would be upgrading to Dalton Kincaid from every tight end in the league right now, minus Trey McBride and maybe even Brock Bowers. So it really just depends on what you have to upgrade from whoever your tight end is right now. But Kincaid is who I want to lock down my tight end spot for the remainder of the year. And then lastly, this advice might not be for everyone, but if you find yourself with some extra depth that you can use to upgrade your roster on a season-long level, then I would try to go after Puka Nacua, who I feel like has been largely forgotten because he really hasn't played it all this year, and he's just been sitting on IR, possibly wasting away on people's benches. Now, the timeline for Puka's return has been one of 2 scenarios. Either A, he is back after the Rams' Week 6 bye, which means that you're going to have to wait 3 more weeks before you can play him, or B, he'll need an extra couple weeks after that to recover fully and could return by week 9, which would give Puka an extra few days to recover after the Rams Thursday night game in week 8. So anywhere from 3 to 5 more weeks from either the end of October or the beginning of November, which both is and is not a long time away considering that October is just next week. Again, this advice really only works for very specific teams. You yourself need to be in a very favorable spot to afford waiting on Puka Nacua, and the person who currently has Puka needs to be in a semi-desperate spot for production right now. If you can move some of your depth receivers, guys like Rashid Shaheed, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Calvin Ridley, Quentin Johnson, Xavier Worthy, any receiver like that you maybe drafted late in your draft or picked up earlier in the year and is producing well now, but maybe it just feels a little bit fluky or inconsistent, I would dangle that receiver and that receiver's production in front of the kind of desperate manager and pull away Puka Nacua to beef up your roster for the second half of the year and for the fantasy playoffs. Again, if you can afford it, buying a player like Puka Nacua now is the type of move that can literally help you win a league so early on in the season.